Ben Shapiro Show. Today's show is sponsored by ExpressVPN. Protect your data from the big tech with the VPN I trust. Visit expressvpn.com/Ben. We've got a lot to get to this hour. Later on in the hour, we'll be joined by Dr. Marty Makary from Johns Hopkins University. He believes that COVID is going to be gone by April, that essentially we're all going to be back to regular life by April, which would just be fantastic since, as you have checked your calendar, you will have noticed that we are now in late February. So not all that long left, gang. Not all that long left. We'll get to that with Dr. Makary in short order. First, we have to talk about the actual policy being promulgated by the Biden administration. I know that it's tempting to cover all of the stupid stories of the day, like Ted Cruz went to Cancun, and we've talked about that, but let's be real. What Biden is about to promulgate is much, much more impactful to your life than any politician jetting to Cancun while his state is freezing, right? That's bad optics. What Biden is about to push is horrifyingly bad policy. So let's begin with his immigration plan. According to Eugene Robinson, it's the best immigration plan. Now, Eugene Robinson is a leftist columnist over at the Washington Post. He says the Biden administration's blueprint for immigration reform is already facing criticism as being far too ambitious to have a prayer of getting through Congress. But the bold plan has one thing in its favor. It actually tries to deal with reality. So, quick note. Whenever somebody on the left uses the word bold, get ready, gang. Bold is just code word for this crap is going to cost you so much money, it's going to make your head explode. President Biden proposes a pathway to citizenship for all of the estimated 11 million undocumented immigrants now in the country who follow the rules and stay out of trouble. For all of them. By the way, the estimate that there are only 11 million undocumented immigrants, meaning illegal immigrants in the country right now, that estimate is way low. Way low. When all is said and done, I'll bet you it's more like 15 to 20 million people who are in the country illegally right now. Now, the way this should be treated is we should assess you the same way we would if you were entering the country legally. Are you of benefit to the country or are you not? Are you going to provide economic incentive? Have you been a good citizen? Have you contributed to your community? And if you have, you get to stay. And if not, you have to go. I don't see why you should be held to a different standard just because you're already here. I mean, you cross the border without actually going through our processes. You should go to the back of the line. You should have to wait. And then we should assess whether you ought to be a citizen. You shouldn't be automatically granted citizenship just because our government has been too remiss in not actually doing anything about your violation of the law. But, says Eugene Robinson, rather than nibble at the edges of the problem, Biden calls for a global solution, analogous to the sweeping amnesty Ronald Reagan engineered in 1986, which, by the way, was terrible policy. That was supposed to be the last amnesty. Whatever you think about the new president and his team, says Eugene Robinson, no one can accuse them of thinking small. No, nobody's accusing them of thinking small. We're accusing them of being small-minded in many ways, but thinking small, no. These are big and crazy ideas. Republicans are going to ridicule the idea. We'll likely declare it dead on arrival, but they would subject a more modest proposal to the exact same treatment. This is also my favorite thing from the left is I'm going to propose something totally crazy, and you're going to call it crazy. But if I had proposed something not totally crazy, you would still call it crazy, so I'm going to propose this crazy thing. Or how about this? How about you actually propose something that's not crazy, and then we discuss it? Could we do that? Biden is right to start by demanding the reforms the country actually needs, rather than the sort of tentative opening bid that leaves the situation of most resident non-citizens unaddressed. The fact is the undocumented are not going away. They're not going to self-deport, as Senator Mitt Romney famously suggested when he was running for president in 2012. Well, that actually is not true. There were a lot of people who were illegally in the United States who actually did leave during the economic downturn from 2008 to 2016. There were a bunch of people who left the country. But, says Eugene Robinson, since the Reagan amnesty, the way our political system has dealt with the undocumented could be described with apologies to Daniel Patrick Moynihan as malign neglect. President Obama did give some measure of security to almost 800,000 migrants who were brought here without papers as children. Beyond that, the undocumented have been treated more like political props than living, breathing human beings, much less as neighbors. Well, I mean, that's really not true. The vast majority of illegal immigrants have not been deported. They've been in the country with their kids going to public schools and taking advantage of taxpayer dollars. Some of them pay taxes, many do not. Okay, so the notion that illegal immigrants have been horribly mistreated is not true. There are some illegal immigrants who certainly have been mistreated, but the notion that broadly speaking illegal immigrants have been mistreated is obviously not true. Otherwise, they would presumably self-deport. As Eugene Robinson says, they are not going to. So what exactly is going to be in this Biden proposal?
Monday, Tuesday, back to winds and cooler 60s on Wednesday.
Make your mornings right. Glenn Beck at 6. Vegas at 8 with Alan Stock. Rush at 9. Breaking news, thought starters, and opinions for Southern Nevada. News Talk 840. KXNT. Stay connected.
and welcome. This is The Ben Shapiro Show. Today's show is sponsored by ExpressVPN. Protect your data from the big tech. With the VPN I trust, visit expressvpn.com/Ben. We've got a lot to get to this hour. Later on in the hour, we'll be joined by Dr. Marty Makary from Johns Hopkins University. He believes that COVID is going to be gone by April, that essentially we're all going to be back to regular life by April, which would just be fantastic since, as you have checked your calendar, you will have noticed that we are now in late February. So not all that long left, gang. Not all that long left. We'll get to that with Dr. Makary in short order. First, we have to talk about the actual policy being promulgated by the Biden administration. I know that it's tempting to cover all of the stupid stories of the day, like Ted Cruz went to Cancun, and we've talked about that, but let's be real. What Biden is about to promulgate is much, much more impactful to your life than any politician jetting to Cancun while his state is freezing, right? That's bad optics. What Biden is about to push is horrifyingly bad policy. So let's begin with his immigration plan. According to Eugene Robinson, it's the best immigration plan. Now, Eugene Robinson is a leftist columnist over at the Washington Post. He says the Biden administration's blueprint for immigration reform is already facing criticism as being far too ambitious to have a prayer of getting through Congress. But the bold plan has one thing in its favor. It actually tries to deal with reality. So, quick note. Whenever somebody on the left uses the word bold, get ready, gang. Bold is just code word for this crap is going to cost you so much money, it's going to make your head explode. President Biden proposes a pathway to citizenship for all of the estimated 11 million undocumented immigrants now in the country who follow the rules and stay out of trouble. For all of them. By the way, the estimate that there are only 11 million undocumented immigrants, meaning illegal immigrants in the country right now, that estimate is way low. Way low. When all is said and done, I'll bet you it's more like 15 to 20 million people who are in the country illegally right now. Now, the way this should be treated is we should assess you the same way we would if you were entering the country legally. Are you of benefit to the country or are you not? Are you going to provide economic incentive? Have you been a good citizen? Have you contributed to your community? And if you have, you get to stay. And if not, you have to go. I don't see why you should be held to a different standard just because you're already here. I mean, you cross the border without actually going through our processes. You should go to the back of the line. You should have to wait. And then we should assess whether you ought to be a citizen. You shouldn't be automatically granted citizenship just because our government has been too remiss in not actually doing anything about your violation of the law. But, says Eugene Robinson, rather than nibble at the edges of the problem, Biden calls for a global solution, analogous to the sweeping amnesty Ronald Reagan engineered in 1986, which, by the way, was terrible policy. That was supposed to be the last amnesty. Whatever you think about the new president and his team, says Eugene Robinson, no one can accuse them of thinking small. No, nobody's accusing them of thinking small. We're accusing them of being small-minded in many ways, but thinking small, no. These are big and crazy ideas. Republicans are going to ridicule the idea. We'll likely declare it dead on arrival, but they would subject to more modest proposals to the exact same treatment. This is also my favorite thing from the left is I'm going to propose something totally crazy, and you're going to call it crazy. But if I had proposed something not totally crazy, you would still call it crazy, so I'm going to propose this crazy thing. Or how about this? How about you actually propose something that's not crazy, and then we discuss it? Could we do that? Biden is right to start by demanding the reforms the country actually needs, rather than the sort of tentative opening bid that leaves the situation of most resident non-citizens unaddressed. The fact is the undocumented are not going away. They're not going to self-deport, as Senator Mitt Romney famously suggested when he was running for president in 2012. Well, that actually is not true. There were a lot of people who were illegally in the United States who actually did leave during the economic downturn from 2008 to 2016. There were a bunch of people who left the country. But, says Eugene Robinson, since the Reagan amnesty, the way our political system has dealt with the undocumented could be described with apologies to Daniel Patrick Moynihan as malign neglect. President Obama did give some measure of security to almost 800,000 migrants who were brought here without papers as children. Beyond that, the undocumented have been treated more like political props than living, breathing human beings, much less as neighbors. Well, I mean, that's really not true. The vast majority of illegal immigrants have not been deported. They've been in the country with their kids going to public schools and taking advantage of taxpayer dollars. Some of them pay taxes, many do not. Okay, so the notion that illegal immigrants have been horribly mistreated is not true. There are some illegal immigrants who certainly have been mistreated, but the notion that, broadly speaking, illegal immigrants have been mistreated is obviously not true. Otherwise, they would presumably self-deport. As Eugene Robinson says, they are not going to. So what exactly is going to be in this Biden proposal? Biden's proposal would allow farm workers, migrants brought here as children, and those who have temporary protected status because of threats in their homelands to apply for citizenship in 3 years. The rest of the undocumented would have to wait 8 years to apply to be citizens, so they get to stay here for 3 years while they wait to apply. And then, if you are just here and you're an adult, you have to wait 8 years to apply to be a citizen. You'd have to pass a background check. The amnesty would cover only those in the country before January 1st of this year, which of course is, how exactly are you going to tell that? Like, really, how are you going to tell that? The whole purpose of illegally immigrating is so that we can't tell who is here. How are you going to know if somebody came here on January 1st or came here January 3rd? That's ridiculous. There's a reason there's a giant rush to the border right now. So, Eugene Robinson is cheering all this. It's going to be radical policy. We've spoken with the former head of border protection, of Border Patrol. We've spoken with the former head of ICE. They understand that this is basically a recipe for a mass rush on the border. So that's one thing that Biden is pushing. He is also pushing forward the so-called Equality Act. The Equality Act is an extremely dangerous piece of legislation. It's extremely dangerous because it goes beyond what Justice Gorsuch just did in the recent case where he declared, ridiculously enough, that the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was designed to cover transgenderism, which is insane. Okay, it's completely anti the text. It's completely anti the actual meaning of the text. It's completely anti the context of the time. It was a ridiculous decision by Justice Gorsuch. It essentially meant that now women get to compete in men's sports or vice versa, mostly vice versa. It meant that boys and girls locker rooms could go away. It meant that you could see single-sex bathrooms just disappear, go the way of the dodo bird. It meant any discrimination on the basis of perceived gender identity would be per se unlawful. Okay, the Equality Act goes even further, because at least what Justice Gorsuch did in his Supreme Court decisions was try to create a carve-out for religious institutions. Right? He engaged in the so-called Utah approach, which is where you broaden non-discrimination law, but create broader carve-outs for religious institutions. Now, I'm not a fan of that approach because, frankly, I think a lot of non-discrimination law is unconstitutional on its face. That's not to speak in favor of discrimination. Discrimination is evil in the vast majority of cases. Right? The reason I say the vast majority of cases is because you can discriminate on the basis of something that is actually relevant. Like, for example, whether somebody's good at a job or not. That is a form of discrimination. It's just the kind of discrimination we're all okay with, as Thomas Sowell talks about. But anti-discrimination law goes too far by restricting freedom of association, and it restricts freedom of contract, and it restricts all sorts of other freedoms that are deeply embedded in the American way of life. In the same way that free speech protects speech you don't like, freedom of association protects associations you don't like. Anti-discrimination law does the reverse. It says you can only associate with people we say you can associate with, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so the Utah approach was you broaden anti-discrimination law and then you have religious carve-outs. I don't like that very much, but at least you have the religious carve-outs in consonance with the First Amendment. The Equality Act does none of that. There are no religious exemptions to the Equality Act. The Equality Act essentially adds gender identity as a protected characteristic under federal law. It suggests that federal and state governments are going to have to pay for transgender surgeries, for example. Taxpayers will have to foot the bill for that. That prisoners will get to pick which jail they go to based on their self-perceived gender identity. The Equality Act is a very, very divisive piece of legislation because, again, if you really want to push conservatives to the wall, attack their religious freedom. If the Equality Act were to go forward, essentially what it would mean is that every religious nonprofit in America with traditional views on sex and sexuality would immediately be defunct. That is, if the Equality Act were not found unconstitutional, which I think it probably would be, because it does not make any room for religious freedom. If the Equality Act were to pass and not be found unconstitutional as written, the Equality Act would essentially remove nonprofit status from every single traditional church in America. It would say that every religious school in America would have to educate kids the way that the left wants your kids educated. That's what the Equality Act effectively does. Samantha Schmidt over at the Washington Post writes, Democratic U.S. lawmakers on Thursday introduced sweeping legislation to prohibit discrimination based on sexual orientation or gender identity, marking the first step in advancing a set of historic measures that President Biden has pledged to sign. The Equality Act would amend existing civil rights law, such as the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Fair Housing Act, to explicitly ban LGBTQ discrimination in the workforce, housing, education, credit, jury service, and other areas of American life. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi said, our nation was founded on the promise that all are created equal and are worthy of dignity and respect, regardless of who they are or whom they love. Well, actually, that's not, no, actually. Our nation was not founded on the promise that all are worthy of dignity and respect, regardless of what they do. Right? That is not part of the original bargain. You can make the argument that some of these elements should not be considered, that we shouldn't care about whether somebody is gay or straight in hiring. I don't care. I think you shouldn't care. But the notion that America was founded on the basis that personal decisions in your life have no impact at all on how other people treat you, that of course is untrue. Decades in the making, The Equality Act passed in the House in May 2019, but was blocked in the Republican-led Senate. Now, with Democratic control of the House, Senate, and White House, the reintroduction of the bill represents, quote, the best opportunity we have ever had to have comprehensive legal protections for LGBTQ people, said Alfonso David, president of the Human Rights Campaign. Senator Romney of Utah says he'll oppose the Equality Act because of its lack of religious liberty protections. Ariel Mueller, a Romney spokesperson, said Senator Romney believes a strong religious liberty protection are essential for any legislation on this issue. Since these provisions are absent from this particular bill, he is not able to support it. So that is, this will pass in the House. It is dicey as to whether it will pass in the Senate. It's dicey whether it's constitutional, frankly, because there is still a First Amendment that says that Congress shall not abridge the freedom of religion. So this would be a pretty significant abridgment of freedom of religion. Andrew Sullivan, by the way, who is a gay man, he tweeted out this press release from the Human Rights Campaign fails to mention this bill would nullify all religious freedom exemptions and end sex-based civil rights if they conflict with gender-based rights. Right? If you're a woman and you want to have a separate sports league, that would go away. You literally could not have it under this particular bill. So that's another piece of Biden legislation. Don't worry, he's not a radical, guys. He's a moderate. Welcome back. This is the Ben Shapiro Show. So, Democrats in the House of Representatives, according to Breitbart, have now introduced legislation that would prevent former President Trump from having his name displayed on any federal project, any building, any statue, any lands, or any other type of commemoration. According to the bill's text, which was provided late last month, the legislation would prohibit the use of federal funds for the commemoration of certain former presidents. Certain former presidents. While Trump has not been mentioned by name in the proposed legislation, he is the only president to have been impeached twice by the House, and that's what the bill says. The bill, dubbed the No Glory for Hate Act, was introduced by California Democrat Representative Linda Sanchez and has 13 co-sponsors, all of whom are Democrats. For years, Donald Trump poured gasoline on lies, encouraged racism and hatred, then lit the match on January 6th. Sanchez said in a statement last month, a president who has been impeached twice does not deserve the honors bestowed on a former president. We should never glorify the hatred Donald Trump personified as president. This bill ensures there is no glory for hate, not a building, statue, or even a park bench. By the way, there is currently ongoing negotiation in the city of Chicago about whether to remove Abraham Lincoln's name from schools. So it is not just limited to Trump, obviously. The bill prevents federal funds from being used to, quote, create or display any symbol, monument, or statue commemorating any former president who has been twice impeached by the House, right? There's only one, that's Trump. It would include any highway, park, subway, federal building, military installation, street, or other federal property. The bill also prevents Trump from being buried at Arlington National Cemetery. So they're going to extend this to after the man dies. Don't worry, they're not vindictive, guys. This is all about unity. According to the bill, the Secretary of Defense shall not approve a determination of eligibility for interment or inurnment in Arlington National Cemetery made by the Secretary of the Army that permits the interment or inurnment in Arlington National Cemetery of any former president who has been twice impeached by the House of Representatives. Also, it says that the twice impeached presidents are not entitled to receive any benefit other than Secret Service protection under such act. So you can't, like, if Trump built, remember, he's the one who came up with this idea for this garden of monuments, right? He was going to create new icons in order to fight back against the iconoclasts in the Democratic Party. There's going to be this memorial statue garden thing where you're going to have a bunch of famous people from American history there. You're not even allowed to put like a little plaque that says created by Trump or sponsored by Trump. Presumably things like embassies around the world that were opened by Trump, like Trump opened the embassy in Jerusalem. They want to take his name down from that. So much unity. So much unity. These people are just, they are wonderful, and they are anti-polarization, and they are very much in favor of discussion. Co-sponsors to the legislation include a wide variety of Democrats, virtually all of them on the radical side of the party. It's probably not going to get passed just because it's bad PR for the Democrats, but certainly there is a lot of backing among the Democrats for it. Alrighty, coming up, we're going to be joined by Dr. Marty Makary from Johns Hopkins University. Why are our media so damned invested in not reporting any good news about the vaccine, about the virus? We are on an excellent trajectory right now. This is the Ben Shapiro Show. Welcome back. This is the Ben Shapiro Show. Joining us on the line is Dr. Marty Makary, surgeon, professor of health policy at Johns Hopkins University. He's editor-in-chief of MedPage Today and New York Times bestselling author of The Price We Pay. Dr. Makary, great to talk to you.
Great to be with you, Ben.
So you have a fascinating piece in today's Wall Street Journal that is well worthy of the read, all about how close we are to herd immunity. It is amazing to see how many people in the government and the media keep downplaying the good news with regard to COVID. Well, we're hearing from the Biden administration that we can't unmask until maybe December, maybe even beyond that. We keep hearing that even post-vaccination, we're not going to get back to normal. There is no normal. And yet you argue that we are actually shockingly close to herd immunity at this point in the United States.
I think as a scientist, you've got to ask the question, what explains a 76% drop in daily cases over the last 6 weeks? And that's the data. That's not my opinion. Now, in the medical community, we, like in politics, have a lot of groupthink. And that herd mentality is not powerful, especially when it's controlled a lot by an old guard medical establishment. To be honest with to be frank, many of whom don't practice medicine at all. And the 76% drop in daily new cases cannot be explained by the vaccine. It cannot be explained by sudden behavior change. It can only be explained by natural immunity. Over 50% of the country right now has some natural immunity. And we've tried to study this in the past with what we call seroprevalence testing, which looks at how common people have antibodies. But guess what? The T cell has memory, it gets triggered, and it is able to produce antibodies in the future. So even if you don't have antibodies, an activated T cell confers immunity. And a study out of Sweden's Karolinska Institute that I referenced in the Wall Street Journal piece shows that activated T cell immunity is more common than antibodies being present after COVID infection. Another European study found that people who live with somebody who had COVID but never had symptoms, that person developed activated T cell immunity. And BMJ scientists, by the way, the UK scientists are often not on the same page as the US scientists. Interesting, massive divide in thinking. Now they're smart, they developed the vaccine first at Oxford. They say that in the BMJ that we have underestimated the power of T cell immunity. So for all those reasons, I truly believe natural immunity has driven down the curve a lot. And now we're augmenting that with vaccinated immunity, 15% of the country by the end of this week, up to 40% by the beginning of April. That suggests that we will be at herd immunity levels by April, and it's already started to kick in.
And Dr. Makary, the amount of bad news that we're hearing from our supposed health experts, the greatest of all doctors, Dr. Fauci, second only to Dr. Joe Biden, in my opinion, in terms of great doctors. Dr. Fauci keeps shifting his opinion repeatedly on this. He'll say that we're going to be much better by July, then it'll be we're much better by December. We can only reopen the schools when a stimulus package passes. We can only reopen the schools when teachers are vaccinated, but maybe they don't need to be vaccinated. Well, we're hearing the CDC standards change. Rochelle Walensky admitted that they set the CDC standards for school reopening based on stuff like teacher union input. And this was supposed to be the administration of science and taking this stuff very seriously. All of this messaging is leading to extraordinary amounts of discombobulation for Americans about whether they should even bother getting the vaccine. There are new polls out. They show that about 1/3 of all members of the U.S. Armed Forces are saying they don't want to get the vaccine. Apparently, they're having trouble getting NBA players to do ads, cutting ads, saying that people should get the vaccine, all because we have politicians who are going out there saying things like, well, even if you've had the vaccine, you probably can still pass along the virus. You should continue socially distancing and wearing a mask until the end of time. I mean, this seems like the policy worst calibrated to getting people to take the vaccine and finally ending this thing in the near future.
Well, we've seen a politicalization of science that was going on for the last year, but now it is reaching all-time highs. And the reason I say that, it's not my opinion, Ben. The medical establishment that was hammering the government and the strategy for the last year, and there were things there to be critical of, has all of a sudden gone silent. I mean, crickets in any criticism of anything we hear about since Biden got elected. Now, I personally believe we should be criticizing any administration. Okay, I'm not saying this as a partisan. I'm saying this as, look, I was critical of things in the last administration, and I'm critical of things now. Why is it that we're not seeing any criticism? And what's happening is we're seeing the White House set these sort of political expectations, and we know those talking points are designed to calibrate perceptions and manipulate opinions so that when things happen, they're seen as, oh, this is ahead of schedule. And the reality is the school thing is a classic example. They're dragging their feet. They're winning by stalling. I wrote a piece on foxnews.com in the opinion section yesterday about how the CDC guidelines completely politicize the issue and violate the science, including an article from top CDC scientists that was published 3.5 weeks ago in our top medical journal, JAMA. A total conflict. Now, if those CDC guidelines on schools were applied to the aviation industry, all planes would be grounded. Why is it that adults get to pack into airplanes with masks and good ventilations, which keep it safe, and there's no transmission on airplanes, and yet kids are forced to have their livelihood revoked? It's nothing more than age abuse because it's easy and it violates the science. I believe the CDC guidelines and the White House statements are simply stalling. And if you stall long enough, guess what? You win.
And Dr. Makary, one of the things that's driven me absolutely up a wall is the insistence that after you get the vaccine or after you've had the disease, that you have to continue socially distancing and masking. What exactly is the argument there? The argument there seems to be, from where I sit, that while the vaccine largely drops the levels of transmission to some unknown level, and while having had the virus drops the ability to transmit to some unknown level, that you might still transmit in very limited circumstances. And so to be safe, you should, but I mean, if you keep saying this sort of stuff, who's going to bother to get the vaccine, particularly if you're young and healthy?
Well, as you know, Ben, I'm a huge advocate of masks. And as we talked about back in April, when I wrote the New York Times piece, I called for an open society with universal masking. But you know what? We've got to be practical. And the way the old guard medical establishment says, oh, we don't know if you can transmit it after you have the vaccine. You could transmit it at just as high of a rate. You know what? We can use scientific reasoning and deductive logic, aka common sense, and say that's not really our problem right now. And in reality, the greatest public health problem that preceded COVID that has been magnified during COVID is loneliness. And I can tell you as a doctor, it affects a body's physiologic reserves. It affects cognition. It affects your ability to do things and your overall health state. Chronic conditions are worsened by it. People are hungry for communities. And if somebody had their vaccine, even a first dose, which, by the way, is highly effective, we're learning, you know what? Live your life. People need to rebuild communities and hug one another.
I'm Dr. Marty Makary, Johns Hopkins University. Really appreciate your time. Go check out his brand new piece in the Wall Street Journal, Why COVID Will Mostly Be Gone by April. I hope and pray that you're right, Dr. Makary. I think you are, because I think that the numbers back you. Naturally, the media will ignore this and continue to suggest that every South African variant that comes out, well, this will be the one that kills all of the young when all of the others have failed to do so. Dr. Makary, really appreciate the time.
Good to be with you, Ben.
Alrighty, in just 1 second, we're going to be getting into the mailbag. So if you're not a subscriber, now would be a great time to subscribe. Head on over to dailywire.com/subscribe. Use promo code GINA for Gina Carano and get 25% off. First, let's talk about the fact February is the shortest month of the year. It means you got slightly less time to check off that February to-do list. Luckily, Policy Genius can help you check off 2 big items with ease. You can compare life insurance rates, and you can save 50% or more in the process. That means more cash to put toward the things you care about, whatever that may be. Plus, there's absolutely no hassle. Their licensed experts work for you, not the insurance companies, so they can offer unbiased advice when you need it. Here's how it works. First, head on over to PolicyGenius.com. In minutes, you can work out how much coverage you need. You can compare quotes from top insurers and find your best price. Policy Genius will compare policies starting at as little as $1 a day. You might even be eligible to skip that in-person medical exam. Once you apply, the Policy Genius team will handle all the paperwork and the red tape. If you hit any speed bumps during the application process, they will take care of everything for you. That kind of service has earned Policy Genius a 5-star rating across over 1,600 reviews on Trustpilot and Google. So, if you're worried that March is just around the corner and you've barely gotten anything done, take a deep breath. Policy Genius will help you make the most of this short month in just minutes. You could save 50% or more by comparing quotes. Feel good knowing your loved ones would be taken care of if anything were to happen. Go to PolicyGenius.com to get started. Alrighty, let's jump into the mailbag. Tatiana said, I wanted to thank you for having Father Mike Schmitz as a guest during your Friday Bible time. I love your Bible talks. I began listening to Father Schmitz's podcast and noticed he has amassed a following of people who aren't necessarily religious in any traditional sense of the word. Do you think we could be on the cusp of another great awakening or some sort of departure from mass secularism? Well, typically, times of great turmoil have driven religious observance up. So the Great Depression coincided with a lot of people going back to church. I think you could certainly see that. I think that the immediate reaction to the end of the pandemic is going to be an almost bacchanalian celebration of being able to do whatever you want. But I think that one of the things that the pandemic should have taught us is that isolation is really bad. And a lot of the isolation killers that people use are not spiritually fulfilling. A lot of the things people do to defeat isolation, going to bars and picking up people and stuff, that's not the kind of stuff that's going to materially enrich your life. Joining a religious community just might. I think a lot of people are going to try it. Sophia says, I'm 32 years old. I live in Israel. The Israeli government is implementing something they call a green passport for everyone who has received a vaccine. They will allow anyone who has received the vaccine to participate in civil society, go to restaurants, concert, malls, flights, etc. I have reservations about getting the vaccine. I want to wait until we have more data regarding long-term side effects. What is your opinion on the green passport? And more importantly, do you think it can be practically and legally enforceable? Well, certainly it can be practically and legally enforceable. I mean, they do this on planes in the United States right now with regard to if you don't wear a mask, they will just pull you off. Could people forge this kind of stuff? Sure. Could people lie about it? Absolutely. But one of the problems here is that when it comes to vaccination, it's possible that if you already had COVID, you don't actually need a vaccination. So that is one of the sort of practical problems here. Why would you go get a vaccine for a disease you've already had, into which you already have some natural immunity, as Dr. Makari just discussed? As far as restaurants and private enterprises doing that, again, that's their prerogative. They can if they want, I would suppose. Caleb says, my wife recently told me I'm going to be a dad. I'm ecstatic about having children. This is my first. Also scared out of my mind. How did you react when you found out you were going to be a dad? What do you know now you wish you would have known back then? Parenting is super hard, and just because it's hard doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. Right? Kids can be a giant pain in the butt, and just because the kids are being a giant pain in the butt does not mean that you're being a bad parent. In fact, it may mean that you're being a very good parent, depending on why your kid is being a pain in the butt. Recognize that nobody has all the answers. There is no handbook that has all of the answers just for your kid. And recognize the people in parenting since the beginning of time, and somehow humanity has survived. Most of what you do is going to be preserving the decency of your children and protecting them and inculcating. Let's put it this way: it's a lot harder to make a child good than it is to ruin a child. So just be careful not to ruin a kid. Right? Ruining a kid is pretty easy, unfortunately. Alrighty, in just a second, we're going to be getting to a little bit of Bible talk because it is indeed a Friday. First, I'm a pretty unique dude, right? I'm truly one of a kind. That's why I sleep on a mattress designed specifically for me. And you can as well. Helix Sleep built a quiz. It takes 2 minutes to complete. They use the answers to match your body type and sleep preferences to the perfect mattress for you. If you like a mattress that's really soft or firm, if you sleep on your side, back, stomach, if you sleep really hot with Helix, there is a specific mattress for each and everybody's unique taste, like me. Just go to helixsleep.com/Shapiro. They will match you to a mattress that'll give you the best sleep of your life. I sleep on a Helix Sleep mattress, but you don't need to take my word for it. Helix was rated best mattress of 2019 by both GQ and Wired magazine. Everything is made here in America. They've got a 10-year warranty. You get to try it out for 100 nights risk-free. If you try Helix and you don't like it, they'll come pick it up right from you, no problem. Right now, Helix is offering up to $200 off your mattress orders. Get up to $200 off at helixsleep.com/Ben. How often I have that Helix Sleep mattress? Every night we get on a mattress made just for us. We took the 2-minute sleep quiz. It came in the mail. It was super easy, and it happens to be incredibly comfortable. The same will be true for your mattress as well. Go check them out. helixsleep.com/Shapiro for up to $200 off your mattress order. That is helixsleep.com/Shapiro. Alrighty, in just a moment, we're going to do a little bit of Bible talk because, it's always good to do a little bit of uplift at the end of the week. The Bible happens to be the single most important document in the history of humanity. And on many weeks, we'll do a little bit of delving into what exactly the Bible is saying to us this week. I have a little bit of an interesting take this week. This is the Ben Shapiro Show. Welcome back. This is the Ben Shapiro Show. So, you know what? Let's conclude the week on an up note. Let's talk a little bit about the Bible. So, I've been doing this for several years here on the program, intermittently. We'll bring up something that the Jews are reading this week in the Bible because every week we read a portion of the Bible. And we talk a little bit about the importance of the most seminal document in the history of humankind. So this week, the Jews read a portion from Exodus. It's a portion of the book called Truma, and it's one of the more boring portions of the book, frankly. This is all the stuff about the tabernacle, right? So if you've ever read the Bible, cover to cover, what you'll see is there's a big section right in the middle of the book of Exodus where it just talks in excruciating detail about how to build the tabernacle. And it's like you take this animal skin, and then you take this kind of wood, and then you coat it in this kind of gold, and it's like reading an architectural blueprint for several chapters. And so the question is why? I mean, there's a broader question there, which is, why do you even need a tabernacle? Remember, before the tabernacle was established in the desert, if you remember your Bible classes on Sundays, God frees the Jews from Egypt. Moses, with God's help, splits the Red Sea. And then God reveals himself on Mount Sinai and gives the Jews the 10 Commandments. And Moses brings the law down from the mountain. And the very next thing that happens is that God then tells Moses to set up a tabernacle. This seems like a step backward in some way, right? Because God, being incorporeal, and God not having a physical body, particularly in Jewish thought, why would he need like a physical place to stay? In order to understand that, there's some beautiful writing done by my friend Jordan Peterson. He has a brand new book that's coming out. And he wrote in his lesser known book called Maps of Meaning about some of this. And here is what Jordan wrote in Maps of Meaning. He describes the difference between what he calls the world as a forum for action or as a place of things. Right, so the world can be viewed in two ways: as a forum for action, a place where you do, or the world as a place of things. If the world is a forum for action, then he says the world is a place of value, a place where all things have meaning. And the meaning of the things around you generates your impetus for action. So, for example, this is actually how you teach your kids about the world. Right? It's not that you teach your baby, this is a glass, or here are the properties of glass. Instead, objects are associated with rules immediately. Right? They're conflated with rules, in fact. I have a nearly 1-year-old baby. When she reaches for a glass, I tell her, don't touch the glass, it's going to break. And so immediately, the glass is associated with a certain value. Right? That is the world as a forum for action. To a child, objects have value and rules beyond scientific, right? And beyond the objective. And they carry imperatives for action. Don't touch the fire. It's hot. You're going to burn yourself, right? It comes along with the rules. The important thing about the fire is not how the fire is constituted or the properties of the fire. It's what the fire is going to do and what that means for you as a human. Then there's another way to view the world. And that is how we adults tend to view the world, which is as a place of things, right? You got a cup on the table. It's not for anything. It's just a cup, right? Measurable, capable of manipulation by science. That's how scientists think of things. Or at least try to think of things. They don't have rules for action attached to them. Well, back in the Garden of Eden, everything was done as it would be for a child. This is why the Bible describes the Garden of Eden essentially as a place for action. All objects have inherent meaning, right? You have a tree of knowledge. You have a tree of good and evil, right? There are objects, and the objects have inherent value systems that are laden in them, right? God made things, and the things are inherently good. God judges them good. A man could not eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Right? Everything has a value system associated with it. Meaning is everywhere, and everything is endowed with meaning, down to a snake that is capable of making moral judgment in the Garden of Eden. Then, human beings sin in the Garden of Eden. We eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and now we enter the world of things, right? We can no longer see things as anything beyond what they are, things, right? We don't see them as things that have inherent value to them. We disconnect things from the value systems that are actually inherent in them. And this is what happens in the Garden of Eden. And so human beings are expelled from the Garden of Eden, either literally or metaphorically. And then we are set in a world of things where it's our job to till the earth. It is our job to shape and mold the world around us. We begin agriculture. We begin creating societies, right? Because we are shaping the world of things around us. This creates an enormous amount of subjectivity, right? Because you can create a world of things in any way that you see fit. Okay, now fast forward to the tabernacle. So God is actually reopening the way to Eden. That's what this is about. So during the Exodus, God reaches down, he intervenes in history in a direct way in the Bible. He shapes nature, and he utilizes it to the advantage of the Jews, right? But he hasn't actually given nature meaning, not yet, right? The Red Sea is not a place of meaning. In fact, nobody goes and does tribute at the Red Sea. Even Sinai is not a place of meaning. Even though God used it as his footstool, that's not a holy place. There's nothing holy about Sinai. Jews do not consider Mount Sinai holy. It's a mountain. God went on it. It had meaning for the moment. Then God left, and there wasn't meaning on Mount Sinai anymore. It's why Jews don't care, really, about Mount Sinai as a place. Okay, but the tabernacle is different. Okay, he clothes it in skins to remind us of his original gift to Adam. Right? Because the original gift that God gives to Adam after Adam enters the world of things is he gives Adam the first clothes. in the story of Eden. At the very center of the tabernacle is the cherubim, from whom the voice of God is going to emanate. So this is the moment that God rebuilds the bridge between man and Eden. Right? So, which means that we have to follow God's, what is that bridge? That bridge is God's commandments. And God is telling you about all these specific details of the tabernacle because he is saying that every detail of your life, all the things around you are in fact invested with meaning. It's your job to figure out what those things are for, the teleology of those things, the telos of those things, right? In sort of Greek thought, objects also come with meaning, right? A cup is there to hold liquid. A human being is there to reason. It is your job to figure out the inherent meaning of nature and the laws that govern it, right? This is why the founding fathers talked about the laws of nature and the laws of nature as God, right? The rights that are given to you by nature or nature as God, right? This is all stuff that the founders believed. The tabernacle is the beginning of that because that is God saying to human beings, you think you live in just a world of things. You don't. You live in a forum for action. You live in a world that is imbued with meaning. All you have to do is uncover it. And I'm going to give you a clue. Here are a bunch of commandments. And these commandments are going to allow you to use the physical world and manipulate the physical world around you to elevate your own level of holiness. That's why the Jews are very fond of the commandments, because the idea for Jews is that every commandment you follow helps you elevate yourself into closer connection with God. This is the hardest thing to do, honestly, on earth. The hardest thing to do is look at a world that seems meaningless and try to find the meaning that is imbued there without allowing you to project your own meaning on those things. That is the hardest thing to do. The Bible helps us do that, and that's why the Bible continues to be unbelievably important to everyday Americans and will continue to be important to human beings until the end of time. Alrighty, we'll be back here next week with much, much more. In the meantime, have a great weekend. Try not to burn anything down. I'm Ben Shapiro. This is The Ben Shapiro Show.